So this would actually be the second video that I make on this topic, and the main reason for doing it is because I am in a rather unique opportunity where I get tons of feedback from people going through interviews, and I believe that I have some rather interesting information, some rather interesting tips and tricks when it comes to both brainstorming as well as how to answer these two questions. And before getting into details, just one word of caution: please use this only for reference purposes, and ideally to find your own strengths and weaknesses, and which, by the way, could be even better than my examples, in which case I'd very much appreciate you sharing them with me as well. Of course, being genuine is actually a choice that I always recommend as well. Now, talking about strengths, there are actually two strategies to answer, tell me about your strengths. The first one is the most common one, that is to find one strength that you have and give an example of when you exhibited that strength. For example, dealing with an ambiguous situation where, for example, you didn't have enough data to make a clear decision, but you use your instinct and you use other information. You called in for help eventually, and you managed to sail through this rather ambiguous situation. The second way you would want to answer, tell me about your strength, is to actually pick 3 of your core strengths, because more often than not I observe that people prefer say, hey, but I believe I have more than one strength, which is perfectly fine. And if you enumerate it, for example, attention to detail, you like dealing with ambiguity, and your technical expertise, and you put it in a nice sentence that throughout your career you work hard to improve on all these 3, which you believe are your core strengths, then this could also serve as a starting point for the interviewer to start diving deeper into these things, and eventually you actually have 3 chances here to let them pick whatever they want, by whichever direction they want to go in, to properly assess your job fit, your motivation, and your expertise ultimately for the job. Something you must avoid at all costs, and this is a matter of practice in most cases, is not to be vague. So in other words, if for example, if you have interpersonal skills is your strength, don't just say, I usually do these 3 things. I usually listen to people, I usually talk to people, and I'm very curious about what people are doing in order to maintain a high-performing team. Don't put it this way. Put it rather in a more specific situation, like in your current job. You lead a team of 3 people, and when working on your latest project, that's what you're supposed to do in your latest project, I employed this framework, this strategy. These are the 3 core elements that I try to audit and to keep an eye on in order to exhibit your interpersonal skills. And it seems to be working fine so far. Of course, quantifiable information is key, but the idea is this. The first example was that I use this framework, which is a very general one. The second example is, for this project that I'm working on right now, I use this framework, which is a specific example. So you'd rather go with the specific examples rather than with the general ones, especially here in a job interview. Something else I wanted to point out here is that there are some strengths that are pretty obvious. They would be required for a role, such as being a hard worker for a senior software development engineer. I mean, if you have 10 years experience with these things, it's pretty clear by now that you must be a hard worker to be good with these things, and especially to be good within an environment such as Amazon's. And this is a rather generic statement that you're a hard worker, because you cannot work hard all day long and still be alive. So try to find something special here, and don't be surprised if it takes you half a day to come up with an idea for these things, because I believe that this is time well invested, because you don't have to be asked what's your strength to talk about your strengths. right? So think of this way. These are questions, these are elements of yourself that you would want to use throughout your interviewing process, not just while being asked this question. All right, now let's go on the weakness. On the weakness, what's your weakness? The most sought after information is, okay then, but do you have examples of weaknesses? And as I said in the beginning of the video, you'd rather use these examples to find your own way to talk about your specific weaknesses and ideally find even better ones. Now, this being said, there are a few rather common weaknesses that people employ, and the first one would be public speaking. Now, the weakness is less, it's not as relevant as the way you pitch it. So in the case of a public speaking, you should definitely emphasize the fact that you're a great you're a great co-worker. So you very much enjoy pitching ideas to other members of your team and speaking in front of your team. But public speaking is something you're working on. And by the way, if you're thinking of referencing Toastmasters, you should know that maybe not half, but 35% of people that I've spoken with, I talk to, they do mention Toastmasters. So you're not going to be a unique case if you're attending Toastmasters. So try a better one. This is my advice. The second example here would be introversion. And one pitch that I heard very interesting from a banker actually, he said that early in their career they realized that while at some meeting they were completely unsuccessful at getting along or starting conversations with people. So that's when they realized that their introversion, which as a banker or as an investment banker rather, is a big deal, is a pretty big issue. That's when he learned that he must really improve on this, and whenever he's in a situation where he has to exhibit interpersonal skills, they automatically rather have a special trigger for them to take the lead whenever the situation arises. So this is a very smart pitch if you think about it, because introversion is not something you can become an extrovert from an introvert. So it's something you can improve at, and if you know how to use it wisely, it could also be used as a strength. But primarily introversion could be looked at as a weakness, depending on the role, of course, and if you have it, for sure. The other example here would be, especially for technical roles, would be to have sales experience. So many people that work as software development engineers haven't worked in sales, in front-facing sales roles. And the way you pitch this is that you've never worked in front-facing sales roles, but you very much enjoy pitching new ideas to your colleagues and coworkers and managers and so on. So you have to be very careful, because you show up as a guy who doesn't like selling things in the biggest online store on the planet, then it's not going to go too well. So you should be very careful again how you pitch it. Then, for example, for sales role, you could pitch something like you don't have deep technical expertise with AWS, for instance. And the way you pitch it, of course, you're not supposed to have technical expertise, but you should ensure that you'll emphasize the fact that you are interested in technology, and you've taken some courses, or you could take some courses online, and you also know how to delegate these responsibilities. You just have your technical people who you know to call in whenever you need this. And very important here, if you mention that, if you say you don't understand AWS, that should be at the deep level, not at the high level, because high level is quite straightforward to understand if you think about it. Another possible weakness that you would want to probably pitch is being too direct, or assertiveness. And this is actually the weakness that I mentioned in my first video. The way I pitched it, that basically while speaking to a project manager, I was being too pushy, so I made her cry. So basically I didn't understand the difference in culture and mentality. So ever since I tried to employ a more inclusive approach and to really do my homework before speaking to someone to really understand how they think. And last but not least, I've also noticed some people rightfully mentioning the fact that as a weakness, they don't have experience with working in large corporations or in small corporations, depending on the role that you're applying for. So this could also be interpreted as a weakness. Of course, being said, all these examples being said, you should ensure that you're not talking about a weakness that will play a negative role in your application. And when I'm saying negative, I'm basically saying here, you don't apply for a sales role if your weakness is sales, right? But other than that, you should, another way you could undersell yourself is to be too negative with this answer. So this is also something you would want to be very careful of. Of course, if you have time, there is some good amount of practice that you could also do with these things as well. The other danger here when talking about weaknesses is what's called in HR to turn a positive into a negative. So you could say, for instance, your main weakness is you work too hard, right? Or I don't know. There are all sorts of strengths that you could turn into weaknesses, and vice versa if you want. You see, these used to work at some point in time where there was a trend like, okay, you could use your weakness as a strength, but these were rather the older days. This was a decade ago when these things were fashionable. I think today you're really going to be scored in your creativity, on finding the most relevant strengths and weaknesses when they apply to yourself. That you'll also be scored on how relevant they are to the profile that you're building for yourself, starting with your CV. So think about this. It is a job to brainstorm on these strengths and weaknesses. You cannot just take them from somewhere and take them for granted. So yeah, all this being said, I really hope now there's a lot more information here, so there's a lot more to pick from when it comes to strengths and weaknesses, as well as how to go about talking about formulating answers about these. And as always, thank you very much for watching.